Welcome back, everybody, to the Aurora Show. And today I'm going to talk about the upcoming transit of Chiron into Taurus. I know we're still a little bit of a ways out. Chiron's going to enter Taurus on June 19th. And this is going to be kind of a brief 4-month transit. So Chiron will enter on June 19th and it'll retrograde back into Aries on September 19th. So it is a brief 4-month window, but I think that it's really important to talk about this particular transit because then I will be doing a series on first contact summer and all of the things involved in first contact summer that are going to go through June, July, and August. But Chiron in Taurus is this entirely other thing that is going to coincide with this. And I think it's just really important to talk about because Chiron typically Chiron has a very strange orbit. So Chiron can stay in a sign from like 1 to 2 years all the way up to 8 or 9 years, which is what we've been experiencing. So Chiron first entered Aries back in May of 2018 and has been there ever since. So this is an exceptionally long Chiron transit that we've been dealing with. And so we're going to get this 4-month window where Chiron enters a new sign. It's going to retrograde back into Aries, and then we're not going to have Chiron officially into Taurus until like the middle of 2027. But 2027 and 2028 are a whole other thing that, of course, we'll talk about. We'll cross that bridge when we get there. But 2027 is the year of the fated incarnation cross change in human design, which we will discuss down the line. And 2028, Saturn will enter Taurus. And so, as you guys know, I've been talking about how the conversation around Taurus is nowhere near done. Now, yes, we finally have Uranus in Gemini. Okay, which I did do a whole video on and talked about the transition between Uranus and Taurus into Gemini. So basically for 8 years, we've had this very disruptive energy in our Taurus areas of life. And so we are kind of trying to reestablish our relationship with Taurus, right? After this kind of long haul of just a lot of disruption, a lot of unknown, a lot of change in the area of our life where we typically don't want it, right? And so that can be very unsettling to us. And so I feel we're having to heal our relationship with the Taurus archetype and with the area of your chart that Taurus lies, because Chiron's going to enter there. It's going to trigger an entirely new healing process, right? Go back into Aries. We will then be immersed fully in the Chiron and Taurus energy next year. And then come 2028, Saturn is going to enter Taurus. So the interesting thing with Taurus, right, is they are known to be stubborn. Okay. They are known to, they like to figure out, and this is my interpretation of Taurus, right? Because I don't have any Taurus placements, but I know a lot of Tauruses. I love a lot of Tauruses. And so I feel like what they want in life is that they want comfort in many ways. And so they try to find what works for them, right? What works for them, what they enjoy, and they just want to stick to that. Like, I feel like Tauruses are very much like, well, why would I do something that I don't want to do? And why would I do something or engage in something or have something, right, that I don't like? And why would I do something that doesn't work for me when I know that this works for me? So it's almost like the basis of common sense is Taurus, right? It's like, I'm going to do what I like, I'm going to do what I want to do, and I'm going to do what works for me. And Taurus also has so many other associations, right? It is the bull. And, if you look at, let's say, Wall Street, right? Outside of Wall Street, there is a massive bronze statue of a bull. And so this is where you get references to things like a bull market, right? In the stock market. They are all pulling from the Taurus archetype. And so Taurus obviously has an association. It is ruled by Venus with resources, prosperity, abundance. Think of Taurus as the one who is plowing the fields, the one who is planting the seeds, the one who is being patient all year long, right? Being consistent, doing what they need to do, taking care, and waiting for the harvest, right? So that is a lot of Taurus's themes. And Mother Earth is very Taurian, right? It is the physical realm. It is our physical bodies. After we exit Aries, Aries is about sovereignty. It is the I am. Okay. So Aries is a lot about who am I and what am I here to do? And they want everybody out of their way. So they're very simplistic in that way. When we get to Taurus, we start talking about sovereignty of the body, right? We start talking about bodily autonomy, right? The idea that I'm not going to do anything with my body that I don't want to do. So then we can get into conversations about like labor and work ethic, right? It's like in many ways enslavement energy feels very Taurian to me because it is the idea of owning somebody's body, right? And the idea of owning their labor. And in today's modern times, I think we're still very much enslaved, right? We have to trade our labor, our time, and our effort for resources. We don't necessarily always have autonomy over our physical bodies, right? And I think we also don't really have autonomy over our own abundance and prosperity, right? Like, I mean, I could go into a whole rabbit hole of like how we truly don't own anything, right? And I think Uranus and Taurus really taught us that nothing is actually stable and nothing can be owned, right? You can own a house, but you don't really own it. You can own possessions, but you don't really own them because at any point they could be taken, stolen, they could be burned, right? You could be in a house fire. Like you don't really own anything. And so it's this idea of like, what is mine and what cannot be taken from me? And so I feel with Uranus and Taurus for those 8 years, we were really learning like what it means to have abundance and prosperity internally, to know that we are the creators. We are the abundance. We are the money. We are the economy, right? We are all of those things. And anything we own is just an extension of us, right? We don't really own anything, but we do own our own autonomy, right? And our own energy and our own effort and our own time. And so that's a lot of the conversations that I think are going to come up with Chiron and Taurus. So I want to kind of dive into this a little bit. So I'm gonna do this in sections. So the first thing that I want to discuss is the last time that Chiron was in Taurus, okay, was from 1976 to 1983. So if you were born between those years, you likely have Chiron in Taurus, which means you're going to be entering your Chiron return. Okay, so for those of you with Chiron and Taurus, this is your Chiron return. Again, it can last in varying years, but we are going to have like a 7-year transit here. And so this is going to be really key for you in particular. But again, Chiron being an asteroid, which lies between Saturn and Uranus, would be considered an outer planet, an outer asteroid. So it does affect the collective. And so collectively, we are all going to be healing these themes, okay? Chiron is where we need to lean into the healing, because when we do lean into the healing, it really becomes one of our greatest strengths. It becomes this gift, this ability that we have, right? When we really get under the wounds and go through the healing process of it. So I would say for all of us, right? I think that you should look at where Chiron is transiting for you, where this transit's going to take place. Again, you can look at whole sign and Placidus. I think taking a mix of that is going to be really relevant. So during these years, these are just some of the events that occurred globally. And again, I like to look at patterns in astrology, but also because what I really practice is ascension astrology, right? It's like I understand the ascension process. I understand that, yes, you can look at patterns in astrology, which does give you really good insight, but we also have to remember that we are in a unique time and place now that is different than when we were in these other chapters of history. And so the energy and the way the transits play out are going to be different. Okay, so we can take the patterns, but it's not like this is just a loop on repeat, right? Because we are in an ascension process. But these were some of the events that happened globally. So the first one was Argentina's Dirty War. If you've never heard of that, this was a war that occurred basically the entire time that Chiron was in Taurus, 1976 to 1983. I would be interested to look at Argentina's birth chart. I haven't done that. It's very likely that they have major Taurus placements, which would probably indicate why this was such a big theme in the country's history and why this occurred exactly when Chiron was in Taurus, like the exact years of the transit. And so basically this was a horrendous war. They called it the Dirty War because so much horrendous stuff happened. There was kidnapping of between 22 and 30,000 people disappeared during this war. So there was kidnapping, there was alleged tortures, and just terror was filling the country. And again, that is very the shadow of Chiron and Taurus, right? Is again not having bodily autonomy. Right? Kidnapping. That is the taking of your bodily autonomy, right? 30,000 people disappearing. Torture, right? I don't want to go too deeply into these dark themes, but the wounding of the body, right? The torturing of the physical body. That's a deep shadow of Chiron and Taurus, okay? We also had basically where the golden age that occurred post-war, right? So post-World War II, obviously, after the war, all these countries had to recover from losing so many people and obviously spending so much money. But post-war, there was, and this is why it coincides with the boomer generation, right? There was this boom of prosperity. This is where you get the quintessential kind of 1950s housewife thing. This is when the boomers were being born, right? Late 40s to the mid 60s. And so their parents, right, had worked their ass off to move into this kind of booming economy, this era of prosperity where you could have one parent working, right? And that could sustain the entire family. And you could have a 4-bedroom house and 2 cars. And that was the age of prosperity, right? Now, during this time in the 70s, this golden age basically collapsed. Okay, so in the late 70s, there was a collapse of this booming economy, and a lot of people were afraid because, obviously the scarcity came in. There was an IMF crisis in the UK, 1976. Great Britain had to borrow a boatload of money from the IMF because they were basically going bankrupt. Okay. There was a global kind of slowdown overall. There was also the Cold War dynamics going on. The U.S. was involved in Operation Candor, which was in South America. There was Cold War tensions going on. So again, we have more fear of scarcity, more fear around abundance and prosperity and the economy happening. There was also, of course, in South Africa, the infamous uprisings in 1976, which they basically was an uprising against the government to end apartheid. Which, for those of you that don't know, apartheid obviously was kind of similar to what we had in the US, where we had total segregation. Okay, but ours ended a little bit earlier, and this is when South Africa was going through this huge revolt and uprising against apartheid. So again, we're talking about bodies. We're talking about physical bodies. Do we need to be separated? Do we need to be segregated? That was a huge topic. Also, okay, so this is the next thing that I'm going to dive into. 1976, okay, so this was right around the time that Chiron was in the later degrees of Aries, about to transition into Taurus, which is what we have now. first Ebola outbreak. That's obviously a hot topic right now. So I just want to give you guys a little background on this because, again, I find these patterns interesting. So this is just some research that I was doing. Obviously, I wasn't alive around the first go around of this. So it says Ebola, obviously a fatal virus that spreads from animals to humans, was first identified in 1976. Since then, there have been, this many deaths, blah, blah, blah. Scientists first detected this outbreak in Zaire in 1976, which is now the Republic of Congo, near the Ebola River. So that must be what it's named after. And then there was another outbreak in South Sudan. Both of these apparently were very, very severe, had like almost a 90% fatality rate. When this outbreak first began, doctors initially suspected that it was some type of like fever or malaria or something, but they found similarities to another virus and then ended up naming it Ebola, right? Now, it says that basically there were smaller outbreaks that followed in 1977 and 1979, but basically it had totally disappeared. Like Ebola had totally disappeared, which this is literally from the History channel, history.com, disappeared for 15 years. So that's very interesting to me too. Like, okay, we had this giant outbreak in 1976, which there were smaller outbreaks a little bit years after that, but then it disappears for 15 years. I find those things odd. Then it says it returned with the largest recorded Ebola epidemic, which was from 2014 to 2016. There was interesting astrology going on at that time. It is said the second largest outbreak then occurred from 2018 to 2020. And we know that from 2018 to 2020, Uranus was in the early degrees of Taurus. Okay. So then, of course, it's talking about 2026 now. So I just find this very, very interesting in terms of how this is coming back around, right? And so my feeling is like, it is simply, there's a great book out there called now I'm going to kick myself for forgetting the name. I think it's called The Consciousness of Mass Events. I have a copy of it. I just don't have it on me right now, but I think it's called The Consciousness of Mass Events. It's an older book, and the author, she does a great job in basically talking about how when you have mass events, right, not something that's like located in small areas, but something that's happening on a mass global level. She basically dives into the frequency of that and says that if enough people in the collective consciousness are thinking about something, desiring something, fearing something, this is what creates mass events. And so I feel like globally, there is so much fear right now around resources, right? Money, the economy. I think the economy is around the world, right? It's not just in the US, although there is a hyper fear going on about that right now. But there is this kind of global widespread fear around resources. And I think there's also a global widespread fear right now around sustainability, which is a Taurian theme, right? Do we have enough food? Which I think they've also kind of convinced us, right, that everything is scarce, which isn't true. But there is this kind of fear too about the global weather patterns changing and the poles moving and the anomalies that are happening in ecosystems, right? Can we sustain physically? I think there's also a lot of fear because of the rise of AI, right, around autonomy over our own work. So there's a lot of fear of like AI, again, like taking over. Are we going to lose our humanism and be pushed to go into like this kind of AI humanism, this kind of robotic humanism, right? Are we going to be able to support ourselves financially like if AI is going to take over all these jobs, if we're going to lose entire industries and economies are going to collapse. Again, Taurus rules physical resources. So of course, there's also a large fear right now about the running out of physical hard resources such as oil, gas, right? And so I feel like because there's enough fear and there's enough people worried about this, I always believe that there's metaphysical root causes to disease. It doesn't mean you don't have to do physical things to heal it, right? But there is always a metaphysical cause to it. And so I'm seeing that, just looking at all of these events, which in many ways are kind of similar to what we're dealing with now, there's got to be a metaphysical root cause there. There must be a connection to the fear around resources and prosperity and bodily autonomy and things of that nature that spark these kind of outbreaks, right? Now, also, in then the early 1980s, we had the AIDS epidemic. Okay, so I have this great book. I highly recommend it. It's called Metaphysical Autonomy. The author is Yvette Rose. There's actually a few volumes of this. It's, as you can see, a massive book. But it breaks, this is like decades of research that she's put in here. And it gives you a lot of the metaphysical root causes to diseases and ailments and things of that nature. Now, Ebola is not in here. I've looked. So my theory is that it has to do with these very similar themes that we can see from the 70s as well. But she does have one here about AIDS, and she talks about the consciousness of the virus can influence the body just like any parasite can invade the body. You might be feeling certain emotions. It says you can have trouble differentiating who is a friend and who is an enemy. You might have self-loathing or self-esteem issues that have led you on a path of self-destruction. You seem to be searching for a way out of life. You can be very sensitive and not deal well with rejection. You can have a fear of being alone, which allows you to tolerate unhealthy relationships. You may reject the importance of your own life. You have suppressed a great deal of intense emotions and disassociated from how you truly feel. You might be on autopilot mode. It also says you can feel very challenged and guilty in regards to your sexual energy or pleasure in general. You might feel that there is nothing to look forward to anymore, that there is nothing out there for you. People in your life might constantly invade your privacy. There might be people constantly requiring your help, basically like feeling like you're just needed all the time by everyone, which kind of is an invasion of the body, right? Think about Taurus. It's autonomy over the body, your time, your effort, and your labor and your resources. Keep that in mind. As a result, you might feel that your personal space is not being respected. People might be very pushy and have a lot of expectations on you. There is immense stress and tension here. You might experience emotions very, very intensely. You can feel depleted mentally, physically, and spiritually. You might invest too much of your energy into focusing on the wrong things in life. You may have unconsciously made a decision to give up due to inner conflict and challenging circumstances. This does not necessarily mean that you've had a severely challenging life. This can be old trauma, ancestral line trauma. It says a trauma from this lifetime can be activated by ancestral patterns. You may be very sensitive to the behaviors of others. Many symptoms are caused by this inherited pattern. It is important to understand that this does not mean it is anyone's fault that this condition was triggered. So I thought that was an interesting take because remember also during the AIDS epidemic, the early 80s, and then of course it really took off into the mid 80s and later 80s, Pluto entered Scorpio in 1984, which means Pluto was in Scorpio and Chiron was in the opposing sign of Taurus. wounds to the body, pain in the body, trauma to the body, and of course, Pluto and Scorpio for my millennials. This is why I think we have such an association with transforming deeply psychological issues, depression, anxiety, suicidal tendencies, and sexual trauma. So, okay, so that's just a little bit of a background, because what I'm really sensing and feeling, right, is this Chiron and Taurus transit. This can bring us into the golden age. It really can. So I want to reframe these old patterns, right? Because all we need to do is understand the patterns here so that we can truly do this differently. Because Chiron and Taurus, as I said, when you do heal the wound, it becomes the gift. So this means we can actually have such an incredible gift of generating prosperity and abundance, healing the relationship with our bodies, right? Like really learning how to feel comfortable within the body so we're not against our bodies, right? Also healing that feeling of feeling enslaved or feeling like you don't have autonomy over your own time, right? I think this is going to be a collective moment. Now, remember, this time around, okay, which is different from the 70s, as soon as Chiron enters Taurus, he is going to be in a direct square with Pluto in Aquarius, okay? Aquarius being technology, innovation, progress. Aquarius is niches. Aquarius is small communities and collectives working together, collaborating together, right? But Aquarius can also just kind of rule the idea of humanity as a whole, right? And so that square, I think, again, this is going to open up an entire conversation. And that's why I wanted to do a whole separate video on this besides the first contact summer transits. I think this is a Pandora's box. I think this is a moment where instead of replaying this pattern in loop, where we're watching the world events and we're going to go into fear, we're going to believe the hype that there's not enough resources, there's not enough money, there's not enough abundance. I think this whole pushing of this new pandemic is once again to simply, it's capitalizing on our own fears, okay? Because one thing that happened after that first Ebola outbreak in the 70s was that the WHO, the World Health Organization, began this kind of increased infrastructure. They started to have more of a global reach where they were tracking diseases all over the place, basically increasing their ability to track diseases and the spread of diseases, which again isn't negative in theory, but I think we have to return to the trusting of our own bodies. We need to heal the relationship with our bodies, with the earth, and with our idea of prosperity and abundance and healing. Okay, we need to be the first and foremost healers of our own bodies, right? And stop distrusting the bodies. Stop, again, with pandemics in general, there becomes fear of the other. So it leads to isolation. It leads to segregation. It leads to all of these things. And I think that this moment, if we can really harness it, is going to do a couple of things. One, the healing of our relationship with our bodies and the earth, for one, coming back to the organic, holistic way of life. Number two, not falling into the fear of others, right? Because again, Taurus squaring Aquarius. Aquarius can deal with isolation, okay? It's being on the fringes of society, basically, and Taurus is the body, okay? So we want to remember that we are all in this together. We are all operating as a collective unit. And three, I think reclaiming our time, reclaiming our labor, reclaiming our effort. I've talked about this a lot in previous videos. We are the money. We are the economy. We are the abundance. We are the prosperity. Nothing can replace the human being in that sense. But I think we're going to find new ways of how to reclaim our time, how to have autonomy over our bodies. And like it said in the metaphysical description here of age, which I thought was really interesting, a lot of those things were very interesting, right? And kind of speaks to what was going on during that time, right? People not having boundaries, right? People not being able to discern like who is good for them and who is not, feeling so much is expected of you and trying to give, right? Not respecting your own boundaries. That was a key thing. And it also talked about putting your time and energy and resources into the wrong places. I think that's going to be a huge thing as well. We have to reclaim our resources in many ways too, and our time and our labor, and only put it to what is actually going to be serving the greater good, which is Aquarius. So that's all very interesting, right? Now, a lot of people have asked, like, if the astrology points to another pandemic. I don't feel so. But again, I think it depends on the collective's response to these transits. Okay. Now, if we go into fear, if we go into worst case scenarios, then yes. Again, The Consciousness of Mass Events, great book. If we do that, we're going to manifest it, right? But we can see that there are different things here, right? And in my First Contact Summer series, I will talk about Barbolt's basket. If you guys have heard that floating around, there is a famous French astrologer named André Barbolt, and he made some super accurate predictions based on his study of the outer planets and the configurations that they were in. So he predicted the dissolvement of the USSR like a decade before. He predicted the 2020 pandemic back in 2011. And he also predicted that the summer of 2026 would be this kind of golden age, this auspicious time where humanity would really enter this new paradigm. So I will talk about that separately. But one of the things that he looks at, of course, is the outer planet configurations, which most of us astrologers look at as well, which is why we're so hyped about 2026. But just to give you a context clue, right? Looking back at some of the configurations of 2020, we can see that I think it was destined to be a massive year of quantum leap for humanity. But again, unfortunately, we can always blame the theys, okay? But the truth is that it's also dependent on the mass consciousness. And the mass consciousness chose that experience, okay? But for instance, January 12th of 2020, we had a Saturn-Pluto conjunction. Now, Saturn and Pluto are both malefics, okay? Saturn, at his worst, is restrictive. Think lockdown, right? He can misuse authority, right? He can be limiting and karmic and kind of like controlling in a way. That's the shadow of Saturn. And Pluto is death. In its just pure lowest expression, it is death. It is psychological problems, right? When our psychological framework is damaged, that really deeply affects us. So Pluto has a lot of psychological implications, and we know that there's a lot of psychological implications from 2020 that we are still unpacking to this day of what it did to the psyche of humanity, right? So Saturn and Pluto met up January 12th, 2020. That was the big Saturn-Pluto conjunction, and it was at 23 degrees Capricorn. Now, Capricorn rules governments, institutions, and authority. So it was basically a test to see how each government and body of authority was going to handle this, whether they were going to be controlling, misuse their power, misuse their authority, which here in the US they absolutely did. But it was at 23 degrees Capricorn. 23 degrees is an Aquarian degree. So the question was, are you going to do what's best for the whole? Or are you going to do what's best for you? Because we know that a lot of what was done they might have sold us the thing that it was all in good intentions. A lot of it was a money laundering scheme, okay? A lot of it benefited the people in power and harmed everybody else. So it was a test. Now, also because Aquarius can rule groups, communities, or different collectives, it was basically a test where you look at each country and how they handled it, and it played out differently for those collectives, right? Now, also at the end of 2020, so December 21st, the winter solstice, we had the very, very auspicious Jupiter-Saturn conjunction. Now, Jupiter and Saturn do conjunct, right? These planets do meet up every couple decades from time to time, but they were at the same degree and seconds, which never happens. Okay. That's the same thing with the Saturn Neptune conjunction at 0 degrees Aries this year. That's why we were all hyped about it. Because yes, they meet up every 38 years. That's not the interesting part. The interesting part is they met up at the exact degree in seconds at the world axis point. That never fucking happens. Okay. So they conjuncted between 0 and 1 degrees of Aquarius. Okay. That is where the new paradigm energy began. Okay. Jupiter is expansion. It's growth. It's a higher vision. Saturn at his best is form. He brings things into fruition. He creates the actual infrastructure for the vision to become reality. They conjuncted at 0 degrees Aquarius. That is what began the Aquarian age, in my opinion. Now, that was the closest conjunction since 1623. And I'll do you one better. They were actually in 2020, they were observable in the sky together. And so the last conjunction in which they were this close and observable was the year 1226. Okay. So that is where I think if you look at those types of configurations, Barbault accurately saw that 2020, remember, especially with that Saturn-Pluto conjunction in Capricorn at an Aquarian degree, it would indicate that there is some global crisis, and it's going to come down to authority and government and institutions to manage it. And with that Jupiter-Saturn conjunction at the end of 2020 at 0 degrees Aquarius, again, it could have gone either way. But in terms of pandemics, that is a huge influence on the collective, Jupiter and Saturn together. Also, Aquarius is an air sign, okay? Airborne illnesses, things of that nature. So I don't think we have the transits for another pandemic, but as I said, it's going to depend on the mass consciousness. Now, finally, why I would like to focus on the Chiron and Taurus transit, this 4-month window. Again, it's going to retrograde back into Aries, but I want us to really embrace this transit, do not buy any of the fear that they are going to sell you during this time. Resources are not scarce, okay? Prosperity and abundance is not hopeless, okay? They want us to think that, but that is the opposite of what is true. This is a window of time where we could really anchor in the quote unquote golden age. Remember, Chiron in Taurus is going to be squaring Pluto in Aquarius the entire 4 months. And then we have all these other amazing summer transits going on. So it is about reclaiming your relationship with your body, your time, your energy, your labor, and your resources, and putting them towards what is highest and best for not only yourself, but for the whole, okay? No, we have to regain a sense of self-worth. Again, I talked about this in the Uranus and Gemini video, the dawning of the real human economy, okay? So I just wanted to give you guys a little bit more insight as to the financial systems, okay? So basically, let's just take some of the key financial windows, and I'm just speaking about the US specifically. So for instance, right, the Federal Reserve was established in 1913. We all know the lore and the corruption around that. But here's what's interesting, right? And so in that, in 1913. So there we had the North Node in Pisces. So we just finished our North Node in Pisces transit. Or I'm sorry, I wish. We're still in it. I've kind of jumped because I'm so done with North Node in Pisces. But North Node was in Pisces. So the Federal Reserve is actually having its nodal return until the end of July when it'll move into Aquarius. And you can see all the changes going on with the Federal Reserve, right? They're singing a different tune these days. And that is due to their nodal return, okay? Now, and during that time of the Federal Reserve being established, there was a Sun-Pluto opposition. This will become important down the line, okay? So the Sun and Pluto were opposing one another. You will see a trend when I'm going to go through all these financial milestones, I should call them, whether that's the establishing of a certain currency or the establishing of a financial institution. I'll talk a little bit about crypto. You will see these patterns and trends, okay? So Sun and Pluto were in opposition, okay? Guess when the Sun and Pluto will be in opposition this year, okay? That's going to be in August. The Sun in Leo will be opposing Pluto in Aquarius, okay? Now, we did also have that last year, okay? So I just think that's interesting, though. That's when the pressure is really on. Now, kind of the next, let me see. Am I going in order? Okay. And then the next one here is the stock market crash of 1929, okay? Chiron was in Taurus. Okay, Chiron was at 12 degrees Taurus, actually. Oh, here's another fun fact. Going back to the Federal Reserve creation. So we had a Sun-Pluto opposition there, okay? We had Chiron in Pisces and the North Node in Pisces, okay? And they were conjunct, okay? So Chiron the wound, right? And the North Node the destiny. Chiron was conjunct the North Node. I don't know what I feel about that right now, but I just find it interesting, okay? And Pisces can bring a lot of illusions, okay? A lot of, it's magical, it's mystical, but it's also illusionary, right? And that's quite literally how I feel about the Federal Reserve. Now, the stock market crash of 1929. Chiron was in Taurus, as I mentioned, at 12 degrees. The North Node was in Taurus at 12 degrees. So again, we see another pattern. Chiron was conjunct the North Node during the crash. I don't know. I just find this so fascinating, right? I can't help myself. Okay, so I thought that was weird, right? Now we go to one of the next big milestones, which was when Nixon removes the gold standard. Okay, so that was in 1971. Now at that time, Chiron was in Aries, which we have Chiron in Aries right now, right? And so basically the money in the United States, as we know it to be currently, comes from this 1971 act, which removed the gold standard, right? So if we are to look at the quote unquote birth chart of money as we know it right now with the US dollar, we would reference this date, because when you change the gold standard, you have now changed the blueprint of money, right? So money as we know it today has been in its Chiron return, okay? Now, of course, I've looked up the birth chart of money as we know it today from this gold standard, right? And so we have been in the Chiron return of this. Now also the, the moon and Saturn are in Gemini in that chart. So that means Uranus is going to be hitting on the moon and on the Saturn of the chart of money, which means it's going, especially when it hits Saturn, is going to drastically change its foundation, drastically change the way that it functions, right? Now, another thing, the North Node was in Aquarius, when the gold standard was removed. And guess what? At the end of July, the North Node will move out of Pisces and into Aquarius. So the current chart of our money has not only just finished its or about to finish its Chiron return, it's going to enter its nodal return. And as you can see with the Federal Reserve example here, when an entity or a blueprint or a person or a country or whatever enters its nodal return, we typically say it's a great transit because your destiny is basically being boosted by the collective destiny. Okay, so it's like your destiny is meeting the collective destiny, and it can be a time where you just feel like you are living your purpose, like divine fated events are just happening, right? And it can be a very, very auspicious time. However, if you are not aligned with your North Node, that nodal return can rock your socks off. Like if you're living too much in the South Node, let's say, or you're not embracing the North Node energy, that nodal return will kick your ass. And that's kind of what we see happening with the Federal Reserve, right? So money as we know it is about to enter the nodal return at the end of July. Now, also on this day, we had the sun squaring Jupiter. Okay, that's another theme I saw emerging from all this. The sun was square to Jupiter. Okay, now let's look at, for instance, the 2008 stock market crash. Okay, you will see another pattern emerge. Chiron was in Aquarius, conjunct the North Node in Aquarius during the time of the crash. You see the pattern? Stock market crash of 1929, Chiron was exactly conjunct the North Node at 12 degrees Taurus. Okay, the wound met the destiny. And if the wound wasn't healed, the destiny took its course. Okay, same thing with the 2008 stock market crash. Chiron in Taurus was at 16 degrees, North Node was at 15 degrees, so almost an exact conjunction. The destiny of North Node Aquarius is we have to serve the greater good. We have to support humanity. We have to do what is best for the whole. The wound met the destiny and it crashed. Okay. Here we had the moon squaring Jupiter that day. Let's see. Okay. So now I want to bring this all back here to the original founding of the dollar. Okay, which was in 1785. This is when the dollar itself as a currency was first established. Okay, are you ready for this? Because so far I've given you a lot of patterns. Like to me, I look very much at like the oppositions and the squares going on that day. That's very interesting to me. But what I want you to really remember is that the Federal Reserve was created when Chiron in Pisces was conjunct the North Node in Pisces. Okay, the wound met the destiny. And now they're in their nodal return. The stock market crash, Chiron was conjunct the North Node exactly in Taurus. Okay, when Nixon removed the gold standard, okay, we did not have a Chiron North Node conjunction, but we did have the North Node in Aquarius. So it's going to go through its nodal return. The 2008 stock market crash, Chiron was in Aquarius, conjunct the North Node in Aquarius. Okay, when the dollar was established, we had the North Node in Aquarius and Chiron in Taurus. Okay, now Chiron was at the 29th degree of Taurus. That feels, something about that feels so painful to me. Like I viscerally like recoil when I think about the 29th degree of Taurus in that way. So this summer, okay, we're going to have Chiron in Taurus and we're going to have the North Node in Aquarius. So the dollar itself is going to have a return of both of these, okay? And actually in 2027, it will continue. Okay, Chiron and Taurus will continue in 2027. And of course, the North Node in Aquarius will continue. So the original dollar is going to have a return on both of these. Okay, very interesting. Now, Pluto happened to also be in Aquarius in 1785. We also have Pluto in Aquarius. So it's also under its Pluto return. There's no like going back from here. Do you know what I mean? And so again, I don't know how this is going to play out, but I know what I'm looking at. And so this can be the age of prosperity. It can be the golden age. So let's not go into fear. Let's just know it's written in the stars here. Okay. Now, as I mentioned, some of the patterns that I found throughout these milestones, for instance, so on that day when the dollar was established, again, like I said, Chiron was at 29 degrees Taurus. Now the North Node was at 13 degrees Aquarius. Pluto is at 12 degrees Aquarius. So we actually had a Pluto North Node conjunction. I'm like, that's painful. We actually had a Pluto North Node conjunction under that blueprint. Okay, so Pluto and the North Node will conjunct at 5 degrees Aquarius, which is actually going to conjunct this original chart here. But this is when Pluto and the North Node meet up exactly together in 2027 on November 30th, 2027. Okay. And they will both be squaring Chiron and Taurus. We also, again, as I mentioned in August, will have a Sun-Pluto opposition, which again did happen last year, but it will happen again this year. And we will also in October and November have the Sun squaring Jupiter, which was another pattern I mentioned to you, and that's going to happen in October and November. Now, I'll briefly touch on crypto because I know a lot of people, there's a lot of talk about how is the economy going to change? What types of currencies are we going to be using? Again, I am less focused on the 3D aspects of this because it's uninteresting to me. And I am more focused and interested in the human aspect. Because again, I believe in the human economy. I believe that we are the economy, we are the abundance, we are the resource. And so I believe moving into a human economy is what I'm focused on. That is local trade, local business, realizing that we are the currency. And so however that works, if that enters a barter and trade, if that's an energy exchange, if we move into a different way of valuing currency and valuing work and labor, right? Like, I don't know how it's going to play out on the 3D level. I'm just more focused on the energetic portion of it. The quantum, people talk about the quantum financial system. That is an energetic system. That does not mean quantum, like we're putting chips in our fucking wrists and like charging things and, we're all on digital currency. Like, to me, that's just another form of what we already have. That is not quantum. There's nothing quantum about that. Quantum is energetic. Okay. And you cannot conceptualize the quantum financial system if all we're talking about is the physical distribution of wealth and how that's going to look, right? Oh, it's either in gold bars or it's in dollars or it's in crypto. To me, that's all the same shit. It's all the same shit. I'm looking at a completely different system, a completely energetic system. So for instance, Bitcoin. Okay, so that was established in 2009. It also has a North Node in Aquarius. So it's also going to enter its nodal return. It also has Chiron in Aquarius, loosely conjunct the North Node, which carries the exact same frequency as the 2008 stock market collapse, which carries the same blueprint as the 1929 stock market collapse, the same as the Federal Reserve. You see the pattern. It's going to have its nodal return. So it's not I have no opinions on these things. It has nothing to do with what I like or don't like or what my opinion is. I'm just speaking energetically of the cosmos. There's going to be a reckoning one way or the other when the North Node enters Aquarius. Bitcoin will come under fire. Is it serving the greater good, or if it's not? If it's not, it will collapse. You will just see that with every nodal return of every chart. Okay. So I don't know. If it is beneficial for humanity, it'll take off, right? That's the same, you know what I mean? So that's going to be the same as the current blueprint of money also has a North Node in Aquarius. Okay, so this is why I tell you guys, I don't think there's any fucking difference. I don't think there's a difference between what they call fiat money and Bitcoin. I think it's the same shit. I think the intentions were different. I think the vision was there, but ultimately they have the same North Node. So, you know what I mean? I don't know. We're going to have to see how it plays out. And so XRP, another one, that was first kind of transacted in 2012. So that's the chart I pulled. They don't know when it was actually established, but I'm going off the very first transaction period here. The North Node was in Sagittarius at 4 degrees. So a little bit of an outlier here. So I think that's why a lot of people feel very differently about XRP. It's a little bit of an outlier here. But what I will say here is that Chiron was in Pisces. And Neptune was in Pisces. So Chiron and Neptune were actually conjunct in Pisces. And they were both squaring the North Node in Sagittarius. Now, again, the reason that gives me a little bit of like is Neptune in Pisces, as we know, right? And it was at 3 degrees. 3 degrees is a Gemini degree. There can be a lot of misinformation. There can be a lot of selling a dream that doesn't actually exist. Okay, it's a lot of this and not a lot of this. Okay, it's a lot of talk, but nothing actually happens. Nothing, it's selling the dream through words and information. And it was squaring Chiron and Pisces. Or I'm sorry, it was conjunct Chiron and Pisces. So there was a wound here. Like we wanted a better vision. We wanted to believe, right? But they were both squaring the North Node in Sagittarius. And that North Node in Sagittarius, which is at 4 degrees, which is a Cancer degree, that is a money degree. I think the North Node here is about a global impact, right? That's very Sagittarian. Also trying to find a higher ideal, trying to get to the truth, right? However, Uranus and Gemini is now opposing that North Node. So basically it's going to come under fire about whether or not it was another just disillusion, another selling of a dream that wasn't actually real. Maybe there was misinformation. Maybe there was some illusion going on, or if it is serving the truth and it is meant to have a global impact, right? And it was carrying the true energy of Pisces, which is limitless, mystical, magical, energetic, right? In tune with the flow of energy. If that is going to serve the highest truth, if that is going to bring us a higher ideal, right? Then it will succeed, but it's going to come under fire of Uranus and Gemini in that opposition right now, where Uranus and Gemini is all about disclosing information, changing the way we think, changing the way we see things, and that North Node is under opposition from that. So I think those are the only two I did. I know there's other forms of crypto, but those are kind of the main ones. So again, we are going to see a lot happen June, July, and August. But I truly do believe that through these 4 months of Chiron and Taurus, okay, no matter what happens in the external world, do not buy the fear. Heal your relationship with your body, okay? This body is coming with you through the transition, okay? So we need to heal our relationships with our body. We need to form a real connection with our bodies. We need to reconnect and reestablish our relationship with the earth, with the physical realm. We need to not go into fear of others, not go into isolation, right? And rejection and fear of other beings, right? We need to remember that we're community, we're collective, we're working together. And of course, I think we need to, again, this big theme that keep seeing the vision of with that square to Pluto and Aquarius is, first of all, there's a lot of innovation, a lot of technology, and a lot of quantum, futuristic, very galactic stuff that's going to happen with Pluto and Aquarius. But we cannot forget our humanness, which is Chiron and Taurus. We cannot forget the value of the human. We cannot forget the value of our time, our labor, our effort, our worth, our abundance, our prosperity. And again, if we can direct all of that to what is aligned with the future, just think of Aquarius as the future. It is what It's a vision that hasn't quite come in yet, but it is the future, right? So if we can put and dedicate our time, our effort, our resources, our labor towards the future, right? But again, has to serve the greater good, and it also has to respect the human being and physical life. Those two things have to go hand in hand. I've been talking a lot about the cosmic human and how those worlds are going to collide. And this will be the beginning of that. But I do believe this can be the golden age. This is this summer and into September with Chiron and Taurus. This can be the golden age. Just do not go into fear and scarcity. Look at the patterns, see them for what they are, and be like, we are not doing that again, right? And just know that we are transforming all of these things by simply how we operate on a day-to-day basis. And so I'd like to view Chiron and Taurus not as a fear thing. Yes, globally, might we see like pockets of fear around resources and scarcity and economies collapsing or currencies collapsing? Yes, but that's not our business, okay? We are the currency, and we have to really, really work with that. So that's going to come on June 19th. So just wanted to give a heads up on that. And I will be back with our First Contact Summer Series.